Welcome to the last talk of this morning session, as it's called here. Our last speaker is Sandro Geiken. Sandro is writing his PhD thesis in Bielefeld. He's been with the CCC for about 10 years, loosely affiliated. And today he's talking about counter-development, the accessibility of technology as an addendum to engineering ethics in the knowledgeable society. Now, he's already regretted the choice of this title. As I understand it, he's going to talk about, well, how the interactions of politics, of participative politics and technology, which I think is a topic that would deserve more listeners. But, well, maybe some people are yet to come. And still, it's 2, so we need to start. And Sandro.
Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, as I already said, I regretted the long title, which was originally initiated for my scientific audiences, because I'm giving the same talk on a couple of other conferences now in January too. But I too late realized that it might be too unsexy for the Chaos Computer Club. And I changed it now, however, for you, chosen audience, access to technologized politics, and you in particular, because I'm going to address you as technologist within this talk. Yeah, as the chair already said, I'm a philosopher of technology at the Institute for Science and Technology Studies in Bielefeld. I'm largely doing epistemological stuff and science theory of the technical sciences, but I'm also engaged in the ethics of technology and political theory of technology, political philosophy of technology. And today I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to present you with an argument on why hacking, actually, which I will term a little different, has to do substantially with resistance as a fundamental access to politics. And just to give you a brief outline of what I will be doing, first, as I said, my argument will rest on resistance. So first I will try to talk a little about resistance, what it is, and I will try to develop a notion of resistance as access to the social contract. Then I will talk about some very basic conditions of resistance which have to be fulfilled to allow resistance to be a meaningful concept. That will be the first chunk of my talk about resistance. Then, having these conditions in mind and a demand which can be followed from there, I will start to talk about political technologies, which as which I will understand technologies which are being involved in political actions. And we'll take a brief look on what that actually means and how far technologies are able to alter political actions and to give a different notion to them, which is politically substantial as well. And then we'll have a special look at what happens with certain high-tech structures when high technologies are being introduced in politics. And as a result of that second part, it will turn out that the basic conditions of resistance, which has been stated in the first part, cannot be guaranteed anymore when high technology is being introduced in political technologies. And that, of course, is a very bad situation. And so I will try to evaluate a little in the third part of my talk how access to high-tech politics can actually be maintained, and the concept which I will try to introduce here will be a counter-development. So to start, first of all, the notion of resistance as access to the social contract. On a very basic level, we can view society, or many societies actually try to have this arrangement of ruling, which is that they appoint a certain class or type of rulers, and those are then committed to act in their best interest and to do politics in their interest. And this commitment can be seen as somewhat of a contractual basis. Philosophy has termed this the social contract in many different accounts. And the contractual basis somewhat consists of a ruler being committed to act in the best interest of his people, and this is of course accompanied by a couple of terms and conditions which are then being stated in material forms such as constitutions and laws and electoral practices and stuff. And then on the other hand, the ruled people who chose him are committed to obey to his ruling and to obey the laws which he gives out. So that is the social contract. And a very common form of of social organization. However, there's also a very common form of breaching this contract on behalf of the ruler, and that is called tyranny. Tyranny is somewhat the more ancient word for this. The more accurate word for now would be dictatorship or somewhat. But I like tyranny, so I stick to that. And a tyranny is someone who has either usurped his post or who misuses his powers and is largely unimpressed by any legal means trying to abolish him or to dismiss him from his post again. And if a ruler turns into a tyrant, then that is somewhat a worst-case scenario for the social contract, because the more powerful contractee denies his commitments, denies the terms and conditions of the contract, and and there's no sort of upper hand which could rule then over him and dismiss him if he just decides to ignore these dismissals. So a question, of course, is how to regain access to the social contract in such a worst-case scenario. And what we see in history was that what has happened is that resistance in these cases comes up as a means for the people to regain access to the social contract and to regain control over their ruler. So resistance is really a very important thing, because it is sort of the ultima ratio, the last means which is available to us if our rulers turn into tyrants. And now to get into this a little deeper, I want to explore two dimensions of resistance, one theoretical dimension and one practical dimension. And the theoretical dimension can be discerned in certain legal and ethical considerations and arrangements. First of all, the legal arrangement is the right of resistance, the so-called right of resistance, that is to maintain the contractual form. It has been introduced in the Middle Ages already as a sort of natural justice, which is above the liege and above the king, and being initiated by God. And it stated that it was legitimate to remove a tyrant and even murder and behead him if that aims at restoring order, and if it is the ultima ratio, if all other means have been explored or tried out but didn't work, and if it causes less damage than the tyrant would have, and if it also has a fair chance of success. And in this shape, it is basically every citizen's right to pursue the right of resistance, and nowadays the right of resistance is also a formal right, a legal right. It has a legal form in the Charter of Human Rights, and it's also a very basic right in many constitutions, as for instance in the German constitution it is the Article 20, paragraph 4, has been introduced in the 68 student revolts to calm the public a little. And it states that all Germans have a right to resist anyone who undertakes it to remove the constitutionally secured order if no other means are available anymore. So this is really a very fundamental and basic thing. However, the legal form alone doesn't suffice. There's also ethical evaluation involved in this and necessary for this, which basically has to do with finding the precise moment at which one should resist a certain ruling. The question is more or less, when is the constitutionally secured order threatened really as a whole? And we can see that there's space for this ethical evaluation already in the very formulation of the Article 24, because on the one hand it states that we should resist anyone who undertakes it to remove the constitutionally secured order, which would point to the however faint beginnings of such a removal, whereas on the other hand it states that this is only legitimate when no other means are available anymore, which points to the very end of such a removal of the constitutionally secured order. So one really has to find the very own and personal point to depart into action in this somewhere between the very beginnings and the very end of the establishment of a dictatorship. I somewhat like to stick with early moral courage, as John Taylor, US Senator 1821, has said, tyranny in form is the first step towards tyranny in substance. And this, I believe, is historically very warranted, but that's just a matter of personal taste. So that's a theoretical dimension of resistance, but we also know a lot of cultural practices of resistance, and they can be broadly categorized in the following way. First distinction runs between active and passive resistance. Active resistance is commonly known as everything which has to do with murder and mayhem, burning cars and dead people. Whereas passive resistance is a concept also known for long, but only popular since Gandhi's Ahimsa movement, who was very successful with this passive resistance thing, which is resistance which explicitly refrains from violence. And within the passive resistance, we can also discern two other types of measures. We can discern indirect measures which have no immediate bearing on the causal context they're concerned with, and an example, a popular example for that would be Henry David Thoreau, the formal inventor of civil disobedience, who was opposed to the American-Mexican War and to the treatment of the American natives, but was incapable of interfering directly with these stately affairs, so he just decided to withdraw his monetary support of the state by refusing to pay tax. So that is an indirect way of resisting certain rulings. But there's also the other type of direct measures which do have an immediate bearing on the causal thing they're concerned with, and house squattings or blockades can count as that. And also, of course, Gandhi has given very popular examples, as for instance, he was opposing the British monopolies on textiles and salt by just telling the Indian people to produce their own textiles and produce their own salt. So that was directly interfering with the thing he was concerned with. And somewhat the passive direct measures are ethically preferable because, as we have seen in the basic outline of resistance, what resistance should do, it should cause less damage and have a good chance of success. And because passive direct measures have all the benefits of indirect measures, like drawing attention, demonstrating things, but also interfere directly with the causal things they're concerned with, they're somewhat mostly more effective and somewhat ethically preferable in the general case. Although, of course, the evaluation has to be done individually for every resistance. Every certain type of resistance has a specific individual set of consequences, of course. So to sum this up a little, as we have seen, resistance is, in fact, despite to what the Borg say, not useless, but a very important ultima ratio to regain access to the social contract in the worst case scenario of a ruler turning into a tyrant. And it does have some legal and ethical foundations, and also some cultural practices in humanity. And if we now look at resistance from a very, very basic point of view, we can see that this relies on some very basic conditions which have to be fulfilled to make resistance actually a meaningful concept. For the legal and ethical evaluation, we have to see that political measures have to be visible and intelligible to some extent, because we have to be able to discern certain political measures, political actions as illegitimate, as unconstitutional in the first place, and then we have to be able to clearly distinguish which intentions are behind there, and who's involved, and so on and so forth. And so, in other words, for resistance to be a meaningful concept and to decide when to resist and to see when you have to resist, politics have to be cognitively accessible. And of course, this is not a trivial demand. It's largely known as well. I mean, the free independent press is largely concerned with trying to make political measures visible and intelligible, whereas PR agencies and secret services are trying to do the opposite. So this is a very basic condition which is already involved in a certain degree of social struggle. And there's also another very basic condition which is more concerned with the practice of resistance. And for practical action, we have to realize that political measures also have to have some physical outgrowth. And in the ethically preferable case of passive direct resistance, for instance, it should be the physical outgrowth of the very measure which is being undertaken. So the action itself should be physically accessible to some degree. Of course, this might seem like a very trivial thing to say, because politics always do have some physical outgrowth. I mean, in the very last case, it would be the very politician who decides these things. So this appears to be a trivial condition, a trivial thing to state. But as we will see as soon as high technologies become involved in politics, this is not so trivial anymore. So these conditions really have to be maintained, and these conditions are important for resistance, to have that as a meaningful concept. And we can state this a little, reformulate this a little into a meaningful demand by saying that political measures have to be cognitively and physically accessible. And we can see,